Okay, good afternoon, students. My name is Kerry Allen and I'm here representing HARTA, which is the Horticulture AgHort Teachers Association. And today we have Ross Redpath, who is an AgHort teacher at Inglewood High School. Ross is very experienced at level 3 and he is today going to discuss production process. So if you have any questions or queries on this and Ross hasn't answered your question, please make sure that they go in the chat and I will get that answered for you. So thank you, Ross, for your presentation today and the time that has involved. I'd also like to thank Study It for their contribution to making these webinars happen. Okay, so all over to you, Ross. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kerry, and good afternoon, everyone. So some of you may or may not have been part of the 3.3 presentation that's preceding this, but whilst we are going to focus on 3.4, there are some overarching themes which apply to both and in fact apply to probably all three level 3 AgHort externals. So, and the presentation that I'm going to talk to will also be made available. And so if you want to look back at that as opposed to the actual webinar itself at a later date, that is indeed an option. So let us have a look at 3.4. So, oops, I had a bit of a okay there before, so I'm just going to bounce back out of that and again. Okay, let's bounce down to our relevant section. I want to start with what the examiner has said in recent times, okay? And the same sort of messaging that, as I said, refers to certainly 3.3. Really important that at the beginning of the exam, you go through, I'll just resume that. You go through and read the questions, read all the questions, and whilst you may be going in there with a very clear idea about what primary product you're going to choose for this standard, this examination, go through and read the questions and start making some little notes perhaps of the key little bits of data and key facts that are going to be relevant to you when you are answering the questions. Okay, as the examiner has said, there is a wide range of primary products that can be selected. So make sure that you make the most appropriate selection based on what you've studied, but also based on the questions that have been asked. What is often overlooked is the fact that the production of our primary products, doesn't matter if it's lamb, apples, kiwi fruit, wool, avocados, asparagus, you name it, is actually produced for a specific market. And before we jump into market requirements, manipulations, and that sort of thing, it's worth pausing and just thinking, what is the market for this product? Is it a local domestic market? Is it an export market? Is it a processing facility, that sort of thing? Because from that market comes the requirements. What does that market then require or want? Whether it is around a quality aspect, whether it is a quantity to make it worthwhile, or consistency of supply. If you're running a dairy factory, for example, you don't just want a whole lot of milk for 3 months of the year and then you shut up shop for the remainder of the year. It's not very economic use of your capital and plant. If you are a pack house, you're going to have a maximum quantity that you can put through it. And so there are some requirements that market actually has. And be very clear about what those requirements are, because linking those requirements to management practices and what is done on farm is basically the main intent of this standard. What has been done and why. And sometimes that linking requires a number of steps. If I'm going to irrigate my potatoes with up to 700 mils of water over their growing season, that is then going to allow me to get the size of chipping potatoes greater than maybe a 10 centimetre diameter, which the chipping market requires. We don't want little tiny chips. We need a decent potato. That requires a certain quantity of water. How much? Well, for a lot of crops, whether it's through natural rainfall or irrigation, it might be 700 mils over the growing season. So actual clear linkages, and then putting the detail in. So not just saying, oh yes, we've got to irrigate. Actually, how much and why are we doing that in terms of what that final product is, what its attributes are, what its timing is, and what the market is requiring. The other thing is, and this pertains to all the standards, is the fact that we are using relevant and accurate information. Okay, you might have got it on field trips, you might have got it just doing some really good research in your 3.2 standard, but the information needs to be relevant. It should be relevant to New Zealand. It should be relevant to the last few years in many cases. So that is important. And at times I've seen candidates put some information down, and they suddenly realizing all the seasons are out of whack because they're really referring to a Northern Hemisphere resource. Old news and data is no good. Okay, we need it as relevant and accurate and up to date as we possibly can. This is from last year. You had to have a knowledge of 2 market requirements. Now, these might be a quality requirement, like an attribute. It might be a quantity requirement. It might be a timing requirement. But they should be specific. Okay, they should be able to be described in specific terms, not just general terms. We don't want lean pigs for use for fresh pork. We need pigs with a fat depth of 7 to 9 mil max. So it's actually a specific attribute or market requirement in that case. Last year, the candidates were then obviously required to identify the significance of your chosen management practice in terms of maximising profitability. So this is where we are linking right the way through a market requirement, a management practice, and then at the end, some discussion around profitability, which is going to have an income and a cost and probably a quantity of production element potentially as well. Okay. And that is typically at that sort of excellence level where you are taking your understanding and applying it to, for example, maximising income, maximising profitability, maximising quantity of production. So it's all tending to link through. And this also is just a couple of highlighted bits from the standard that we've just talked about. I guess a key thing about the difference between management practices and manipulations. So the management practice, remember, is things like irrigation, adding fertilizer, mating, etc. The manipulation is the specific option or way the grower is carrying it out, how much irrigation is being applied and how often. If we're looking at fertiliser, how much and what type of fertiliser is being added to our potato land at harvest or as a side dressing in order to generate the growth and the yields that we need, sort of thing. Often the examiner has divided the production process into sort of 3 distinct phases, so establishment, growth and harvest. You should know management practices across the entire production process. In some production systems, establishment is, you can take it maybe as the breed selection or that sort of thing. Harvest could be selling them into the pack house, sending them off to slaughter, etc. Okay. As well as the ones mentioned, some markets will also have consistency and uniformity or presentation requirements. So consistency talks about having consistency over time. Uniformity tends to refer to a particular group of animals or bins of fruit or produce being sent away. Uniformity in terms of the size of carrots or the count size of apples within a particular bin, tray carton, etc. So how is that actually achieved? If we are talking about product attributes, the key thing with them is they are measurable. So we don't produce apples, we produce apples of a particular count size. We don't produce nice lean pork. We've got pork which is fat depth, 7 to 9 mil, that sort of thing. And so all of these examples here, fat content, sugar levels, size, mass, diameter, tenderness, etc., they're all measurable. And use those measures in your answer. Really, really important. And because, as I was saying, sometimes my students use pork, and the sort of measurable attributes which can be referred to, which the market requires, differences between slightly different market opportunities. Fresh pork, you can see a different carcass weight, a different fat level, and the fact that female pigs are preferred because you don't have board taint. If you're processing it into ham and bacon, we've got a larger carcass weight, we are allowed a little more fat, and board taint is not a problem because it is disguised by any processing, the curing of it, that sort of thing. And from a student's perspective, how does the grower achieve these attributes? How do they achieve that particular level of back fat? And that is where you get your breeding, you get your scanning with ultrasound, you get your different feeds that they're being fed, you get regular drafting off to the works. Those sort of manipulations which are carried out. And as I was talking there, we're not just feeding for low fat, we're actually using specific breeds that we can name. Okay, so incorporating that detail into your answer is going to allow you to access those merit and ultimately, hopefully, excellence level grades. I spoke earlier about the difference between a management practice and a manipulation, so I'm just going to bounce past this one. And the fact that being clear about if the terminology appears in the exam questions, the schedule of operations, management practices, manipulations, and answering relevant to what you have been asked about. Typically, you'll be asked about management practices and specific manipulations. In recent years, you haven't tended to be asked about outlining the actual sequence of management practices that the grower carries out, but you should know them, because when you are answering, you've got in the back of your mind where during this schedule of operations are the management practices which are most relevant to this particular part of the question. So doesn't matter whether you are producing lamb or apples or asparagus, there is a schedule of things that are done, and consider them as you are looking at the questions, and therefore you can select the most relevant and easy to answer one. Just by way of an example, and this also comes from an old marking schedule, here explain the market requirements and what the quality requirements or perhaps are. So in this case, a timing requirement being described in terms of the chilled lamb market, UK Christmas, and the premiums being produced. Apples. Here, what I would like to see, and because these are at probably only an achieved level, I would like to see here when Golden Week is, what the premiums are that the grower is actually receiving. Okay, so that is an example of the sort of detail that we would like to think candidates are able to provide. And then just some more examples of management practices and how they link to the market requirements, etc. Okay, this was the timing for that Christmas market of lamb in the UK. How do we actually lambs ready for that time? Basically, it's looking at the actual feeding of them, allowing them to grow really, really quickly, more than 400 or 500 grams per day, and therefore they'll get to that slaughter size earlier. Here, to be fair, the candidate actually said what that slaughter size is, maybe a 38 kilogram live weight, 18.5 kilogram carcass weight is what slaughter size the market actually requires. This is the management which is actually allowing it to be achieved in order to meet the timing requirement of before Christmas. So planning, identifying the information that you know, and then putting it together is the key thing in this particular standard, this particular exam. Okay. Excellence level, you are probably going to be, as with in 3.3, you are going to be wanting to, you're going to be asked about justifying. It is usually on the basis of, I'm just going to bounce out of sharing screen here, that excellence level is usually on the basis of justifying according to maximizing price. So what is the grower doing? What are the manipulations that are being carried out to maximize the price the grower receives? What are the manipulations perhaps that are being carried out to maximize the quantity that is being sold? And I'd make a little clarification here, because if we go to an apple orchard, and some of you hopefully have been to an apple orchard, you'll see a huge amount of apples are potentially produced, but many of them are wasted. So we need to be very clear about maximizing quantity in terms of the quantity that is sold. And things like apples and apple growers, that is one of their real things they're striving to do. Every apple that is left on the ground or is not put into a carton and sold is basically a waste of time and resources. So they need to really look at what management practices enables them to have a really high, what they might call a pack out percentage, or a real high level of harvested apples as opposed to apples that are gone to waste. So what are the management practices that are carried out to achieve that? What might be the management practices that are carried out to achieve a particular timing requirement? That timing might be about the market's demand and when they want it. It might be around when the processor is able to take them in any decent quantity, etc. So coming back to our lamb example earlier, what wasn't on that sheet that I was referring to is the fact that to get lambs to the UK early, you're going to have to lamb early. So therefore, you're going to have to put the rams out early. And therefore, you're probably going to want to flush them early so you get a good quantity of lambs on the ground in maybe late June, early July even. And so taking it back from those management practices in order to meet the market requirements, and then at the end being able to justify it. And if we stick with the lamb example, why the timing of putting your ram out might be considered more significant than the feed, because as long as the ewes are in good condition, perhaps the lambs are going to get enough nutrition and they're going to grow pretty well for the first 2 or 3 months anyway. But if you've got a lamb being born in September, no matter how well you feed it, you are not going to get it on the ship in mid-October to get to the UK or early November to get to the UK. So justifying and carefully considering the management practices before making that the choice of management practices during the body of the paper, if you're given a choice or asked for choice, and then the choice if you're asked to justify them in terms of a particular outcome, price, quantity, profitability, whatever. And so the planning becomes really important. 5 minutes planning will probably save you 15 minutes writing, because you're writing only relevant material, you're not going off on tangents, and you've clarified and structured the key bits of data and information that you're wanting to include in your answer. Kerry, do we have any questions at this stage?
No, once again, a little bit quiet. No questions at all.
Okay. Well, in terms of 3.4, which, and I'm going to say what I say to my own students, if you have got your key bits of data for your product and the various management practices and that sort of thing, and okay, mine have usually got 2 products that they can choose from, and whilst, as I said at the start, they may go in with the idea, I'm going to use this particular product, when you look at the questions, and if it's, for example, a question around, there might be a timing or uniformity or something like that, there may well be good reason to bounce to their second product because it suits that particular question a lot better. Doesn't mean to say you can put more than 2 products. You can put 2 products within the one paper. You've got to use the same product across the whole paper unless something changes drastically. But making sure that that whole paper and its questions are read carefully. Think about the market requirements. Think about the management practices that are relevant to the questions that are being asked, and think about what sort of justification is being required. Because often with a little bit of strategic choice, your justification excellence level answer can become so much easier because it will just flow better. As I said before, justifying putting the ram out early in early February in order to have an early lambing day as a manipulation of a management practice which is more significant than feeding the lambs really well in September and October, simply because in order to meet that market requirement of early season lambs, that is a much more relevant, significant management practice than the other one, which it has been compared to. So, yeah, look at the questions very carefully, include data and detail. Okay, always be thinking when you're writing and putting information down, what data or detail do I know? If I say early lambs, what does that mean? If I say big apples, what do I mean? Okay, high sugar, low sugar in case of maybe potatoes, chipping potatoes. What do we mean by low sugar? There is a value that will go with that. Include that value. Okay, how do we get the size of potatoes required for that particular market? There is a variety selection. There is fertilizer. There is irrigation. There is all sorts of things. But whenever you can add some detail and data to your answer, do so. But make sure it is relevant. Make sure it is pretty accurate. Okay. A slight variation, not too much problem. But if you start just trying to pull figures out of the air, you're probably going to run into strife. Okay, so make sure data which is put down is accurate and relevant. And that is really all I've got to add or to say, and to hopefully give you some food for thought as you run into the exam in your revision and stuff leading into it. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Ross, for your time. That was awesome. Once again, giving lots of little tips and suggestions to make or allow students to obtain the grades that they're capable of. So once again, thank you very much and for your time and your presentation. And also, once again, a big thank you to Study It. All right. Good luck with your exam, students.